there is a vibe shift happening, and I think it's worth drawing attention to. I think it's worth talking about because the notions of social and civic belonging that the liberal order has promoted for the last at least 30 years, but probably going back way further than that, probably about 50 years, something like that. Maybe even back to 1948. These notions of who is and who isn't have been bastardized. They have been damaged, and they have come to resemble things that do not accurately describe reality. As in, the idea of British and British identity. Well, we are told, essentially, that anyone can be British. So, okay, well then why doesn't everyone just become British? Why not just people in other countries just declare, yeah, we're British now, everyone's British, and therefore give us citizenship? We're British people, you owe us citizenship. If, Al Fatah can get British citizenship, anyone can. Why doesn't the whole damn world just do it? What prevents them? And how would we tell them that they aren't British if anyone can be British? If being British is merely just about self-identification, then surely the British government could just take over the world by offering the entire world citizenship and then saying, yeah, actually the imperial project's back. Because the idea of this kind of expanded citizenship was a part of the imperial project. Was it 1941 with the British Nationality Act that just made the entire empire citizens of the country? It's like, well, okay, anyone who is a subject of the crown, I guess. And then if you've now got the liberal universal view that everyone can be anything, well, what's the point of calling something British if it can't distinguish between itself and something else and describe something that is not the same as another thing? What's the point of it? The notion of being British has been so diluted as to become devoid of content. It is just a marker that we still use for some reason, presumably to mark in-group. I mean, it's got legal status. Obviously, you're allowed to access benefits, you're allowed to enter the country, blah, blah, blah. But we give it away like it's worth nothing anyway. And our welfare states are becoming dilapidated. I mean, good luck getting an appointment on the NHS. Oh, I'm here to claim free healthcare. Hell, get in line, bro. Good luck with that. And so the issue with expanding the definition of an identity, whether it's an ethnic identity, a native identity, a sort of corporate identity, an institutional identity, when you expand it to mean literally everyone on Earth, at least in potential, well, you've made it so it's not really very useful, and you've made it so it's not really very valuable, and so people realize, right, if this isn't actually fit for purpose, what does it actually mean to be British, let alone to be English, Welsh, Scottish, or Irish? And this is a question whose time is coming. There is a vibe shift underway, and as you can see from The Guardian here, the number of people who say Britons must be born British is rising, study shows. The thing is, being born British isn't actually the thing that matters here, because they'll always throw in your face, what about Boris Johnson? Boris Johnson's something like 65% English and then a mishmash of other things, so I would count Boris Johnson as English. And he was born in New York, so it's right, is he not British? Like, no, obviously Boris Johnson is British. There are British people born overseas who are still British, because they are born to British parents, and that means parents who are either English, Welsh, Scottish, or Northern Irish. That's what makes them British. You acquire your Britishness through your heredity, through lineage. That's how it's done. Now, that's the essential layer of this. So, essentially, to be British, you have to inherit Britishness biologically. But there is also the layer above that, which is cultural, right? So if the British produce their culture, everyone has a culture. The culture it's treated as if it's some sort of mystical thing, but culture is just what a people in a location do, what a specific kind of people does. So you've got cultures everywhere. It's just what they do and how they do it, the character of what they do. And the character of cultures generally tends to be different in each country, in each location, even areas of countries. And that's perfectly fine and normal. And the culture is, of course, produced by the people. And so you've got a second layer that is distinguishable from the first layer in conceptually, at least. In practice, it's kind of hard to distinguish British culture from British people, although it is possible. I mean, there are areas in Pakistan that are called Little Britain or Little England because it is Pakistani repatriates who have gone back and sort of set up British areas of Pakistan because they preferred the way that we did things, but they wanted to live in Pakistan. And so they've mimicked the culture. So you can see there is a distinction there. You can have the kind of simulacrum of British culture operating in Pakistan or wherever without the British people. It is something you can mimic, but it's not something they can generate. It's something that can be imported, but it can't be organically produced because they are not the British people. They didn't produce that culture, and they have to do it artificially. You get the same thing with like weebs and stuff like this, and weeaboos or whatever they call them, like, you know, Japanophiles. Like it's the same with any of these things. You can have a love for someone else's culture, even if it's not your own, and you can mimic it, but you can never generate it. And then on top of that, you've got various other things like the laws and civic institutions. This is another layer on top of the culture which has been produced by the people. And this is where the civic nationalist resides. They're like, okay, well, I like the laws, I like the customs, I like the institutions and the political habits of these people. And I think that is in and of itself a separate identity. It's something we'd like to copy and model. It's like, well, I mean, you can try, but again, to get the authentic experience, it has to be based on a certain kind of culture, and that culture is produced by a certain kind of people, and it is going to be partially genetic. It's also going to be interspersed with the history that they've had, the historical events that have made them the kind of people that they are, and the kind of experiences that they have, and the kind of results that they've had throughout history, and the norms and customs and expectations that they bring to this. And so this is a very complex sort of layer cake of identity. And people in the liberal order have a habit of trying to pull out one or two bits and saying, right, this is it. Like, this is the thing that Andrew Gold is saying. He's like, well, I think culture is important. It's like, okay, but the culture isn't separate to the people. There's no, culture that you can just grab hold of and then just slap down. You have to, if you want to say set up British culture in Pakistan, you have to have knowledge and experience of British people acting in a particular way and then transplant that artificially somewhere else. Well, it's the same with the institutions and the laws and the political habits. If you want those things, that's great, but they're going to take on a different aspect, a different dimension, because the culture that is required to uphold them won't be present in this foreign place. It takes on the aspect of an ideology. The culture won't be present in a foreign place, and the people who produce the culture won't be the ones producing it. So a good example of this is people being like, well, how do the average 68 IQ Somalis do so well taking advantage of the American welfare state? And so, well, because the American welfare state was set up by a culture and people that were conscientious when it came to civic matters. They have a high trust in their society, and they expect one another not to take advantage of the system unduly, because they all understand that if they all work hard and they all pay into the system is actually sustainable. You can actually have this without having it collapse under a massive weight of fraud. But the Somalians don't have that culture. They're not those people. They don't produce that culture. And when and so they don't come from this high trust culture. So when they see these avenues that you could take advantage of if you wanted, well, they're going for it. They're just like, oh, well, okay, why wouldn't I do that? That would be crazy, because they've come from, they don't come from what I guess we call a sort of national culture. They come from sort of clan cultures. So they are competing with other clans for resources for themselves, rather than understanding there is a shared national project that is underway with the high trust society. And so you have this distinction, and you can see how we're vulnerable, and you can see how it operates on different layers. And so the question is, well, okay, well, who is actually British? Well, you've got the Andrew Gold types who say, well, the culture is all that matters. Well, not really, because the culture isn't separate from the people. And even if foreign peoples want to emulate the culture, don't get me wrong, they should if they're here. But it's not sufficient to say, well, Britain will still be exactly the same if all of the people are replaced and they just imitate the actions of the native population. Well, they won't be British. They won't act British on a cultural level. And for most people, that's more than sufficient to say, okay, well, you can join our club, right? You can join our tribe and be a part of the local community and whatever. That's fine. Most people aren't that bothered about it. But I think people are becoming more bothered about it because of the nature of the changing demographics. What that was always predicated on was an overwhelming demographic security of the native population. Then, yeah, you can bring in a small number of foreigners, and it's no problem at all. And in fact, it can make things fun and interesting because you've got strange restaurants, right? This is the only argument they can ever really make. It's like, okay, well, we've got the restaurants. Okay, well, do we really need more than 5% of the population, 10% of the population to be foreign for us to have nice restaurants? I mean, I thought our restaurants were fine, to be honest, but I'm not the one making that argument. But even then, it's limited in its own scope because, okay, well, how many restaurateurs do we actually need to have the nice restaurants? And the answer is not more than 10%. It doesn't, not more than 5% probably. I mean, we had foreign restaurants in the 90s when we were 95% white British, or white English anyway, in England. How many do we actually need? And so the point that I'm making is that the question is being forced on the British public. Okay, who is actually British? What do you need to be British? And you need to have native British ancestry, about a third of the people are saying. So this is an issue that's been changing. So if you go back 10 years, they would do surveys like this, and it's only 1 in 10 people who'd say you need some sort of native British ancestry. 1 in 5 in 2023. So that's actually really quick. But back in 2015, they'd do these and they'd be like, oh, it's 1 in 10 who think you have to have some sort of native British ancestry. But now, in 2023, it went to nearly 1 in 5. And now it's over a third of people. So it's actually an idea that is maturing where people are actually having to spend a bit of time thinking about it and say, okay, well, to be properly British, it's not sufficient to just have been born here. You have to, one in 3 people think you do have to be born here to be truly British. But even then, the other aspects of being British are rising. Because as they say, 71% of Reform supporters held the most extreme views, which is having British ancestry was a prerequisite for someone to be truly British. Well, what do we mean when we say truly British? If you're not actually British in the essential level, as in you are lineally descended from British people, then how could you make an argument that someone who is mimicking British culture or mimicking British institutions could be truly anything, because fundamentally they are mimicking that thing? They couldn't be truly anything. It has to be on the essential level where the truth of being British is found. And we know this because this is what would be dug up in 1,000 years by archaeologists. They do DNA tests on the bones. Like, oh, this is a Pakistani woman. This is an Indian man. This is a Welsh man. This is an English man. This is a Scottish woman. They would have objective measurements. And if we want to talk about truth, we have to be talking about in objective correspondence to reality. So in reality, the person is determined by what they physically are, and the way that they behave in society is something else on top of that. Now, I'm pretty soft-hearted with a bunch of this sort of stuff. I think that, we don't need hard and fast categories when it comes to who should and shouldn't be here, right? I'm willing to accept that, yeah, there are some people who are born and raised here who, David Lammy's a good example. Deporting David Lammy would be funny, only because to see him struggling in Africa would be the funniest thing in the world. What does David Lammy know about Africa? I'm quite soft-hearted in that way. But the truth of it is that David Lammy is not British because he does not have British ancestry. He is culturally and institutionally British, but he is not ethnically British. And that's just the fact of the matter. And it seems that more and more of the British public are coming around to this point and saying, well, look, a third of them, again, without thinking very hard, I imagine, are like, well, yeah, you've got to be born in Britain to be British, which makes sense on a sort of, surface level. If you're not born in Britain, how could you be British? Well, the answer is you have British ancestry and you were raised by British parents, even if that was overseas. But the point is, 59% of Reform supporters say they believe the nation was an ethnic and not a civic community. Now, that is just accurate. A nation is an ethnos. A nation is an ethnic community, shared, bound by blood, bound by lineage, bound by common occupancy of an area, and bound by common custom, culture, and heritage. That is true. That is what the definition of a nation is. Now, that's not to say that there can't be aliens living within the nation who are a good part of the nation, who are like well integrated, completely culturally assimilated, have a place in the society that has dignity and honor, and they do the right thing, and they're not they consider themselves to be incorporated into the nation, right? It's not to say that it has to be about racial purism, but it does have an ethnic, which means an essential component at the bottom of it, which 59% of Reform voters are just describing accurately what a nation is. And so they're quite worried about this, as you can see. They think that the results are evidence that the hard right narratives are having some success in remoulding the public's conception of a national identity. The thing is, this is just a traditional national identity. There's a traditional conception of what a national identity is. It's not in any way controversial. It does not require any kind of outside ideological considerations. It's just, if you were to look at the real world through the sense perceptions that you have and say, right, what is a thing? If you're describing things that you see around you, well, a nation is a group of people of shared lineage and heritage who live in a particular area. And sometimes they don't even live in a particular area. I mean, this is what the Jewish diaspora is about. They are they consider themselves a nation that lives in other nations until the founding of the State of Israel, of course. So it doesn't even necessarily mean that they have to have a particular plot of land. Although I'm personally completely in favour for national sovereignty. I think every ethnic group deserves its own sovereign state, because otherwise you're not going to have a government that's looking out for you. Not that we have a government looking out for us, but then we don't have a sovereign state. So I don't know what I'm complaining about there. But the point is, you can see that they are worried about how this is going. They say, overall, popular opinion still supports a progressive vision of Britishness based on shared values, not ethnicity or ancestry. Well, the problem with this is that's not really a nation. That's a political alliance, because values can change. You can change your values like the wind. You could wake up and say, I feel like being a Nazi today. Oh no, I'm going to be a communist. Oh no, I'm going to be a liberal. Oh no, I'm going to be a social democrat. Oh no, I'm going to be an ANCAP. And you can just flip between these as much as you want, because values can just be chosen. In the sense that we have been discussing, there is nothing objective or solid or real about values. These are essentially a kind of vanity that we live with on a social level, cultural level, to be that just makes us familiar to one another. But the thing is, the values that we express in our behaviour are never only in the things that we distill them down to. There's always a lot that goes unsaid and assumed when you say, well, I'm for democracy or tolerance or whatever it is, whatever the British values are. There's always a huge amount that's assumed in that goes unsaid, because you don't normally have to spend a lot of time rationalizing it. And when you do distill these things down to a few ideological prescriptions, well, there's a lot that leaves out. And this is why it's jarring when you get Middle Easterners who are wearing their hijabs and going to mosques and doing all sorts of cultural practices that are alien to Britain, saying, oh yeah, we profess British values in a political sense. And it's like, okay, well, I don't feel that they're British, and I don't think they're reproducing British culture, even though they can claim this, support the progressive version of a vision of Britishness based on shared values. But we don't actually share values. What we are doing is coming to a political settlement by which we're not just killing each other. Okay, great, but they're not part of our tribe. We don't have a shared ethnicity or ancestry with them. They're just here because our government has brought them here. They're not here out of any kind of necessity. They're not really a part of us. And everyone recognizes that, right? In the reality of everyday life, that's what's being recognized with all of these problems. And so it's not necessarily that hard right narratives are having success here. I think it's just the exposure to multiculturalism that is doing this. I think even if there was no hard right narratives online, this would be an attitude and an idea whose time is coming. Because if we just say, well, everyone is exactly the same as us and everyone is British and everyone has equal right as us, well, we're just facilitating the dispossession of us from our own native homeland for something that can just change tomorrow. I mean, when they might be professing infinite amounts of tolerance and reciprocity and British values or whatever it is, and when they're like 80% of the population, they'll be like, yeah, actually, we don't really feel that way anymore. And what are we going to do then? And what are our options? But anyway, the point is that the Guardian and everyone can feel the vibe shift. They can feel how things are changing. And I don't think this is as much to do with far-right propaganda at all. I think genuinely it's that everyone can see the country changing and they're like, well, hang on a second. These people aren't British. How has this happened? And I think the change will continue until we see demographic difference in the other direction.